All right, all. The last major topic that I kind of want to discuss today is that of typography. Okay. So when our course that we've been dealing with, we've been doing a lot with images and video and working with animating things or setting up motion. A lot of times you're going to want to work with type, and so I kind of want to just go over some of the basics of type. All right. So we're going to talk about typography. This is not specific to this course or even motion graphics in general. Typography can be applied to any type of design, whether that's like poster design, web design, anything like that. So we're just going to talk about general typography concepts and then how those might apply in the sense of motion design. So, um, here's this kind of quote that I like. A picture may be worth 1,000 words, but sometimes you still need words. Okay. Meaning that, like, there are a lot of things you can convey visually with, video or whatever, but certain things just don't translate well unless you're using text. Things like names, proper nouns sometimes, time, prices, all that good stuff. So there's a lot of ways to use typography to your advantage or make something that's visually interesting. So let's talk about what are some concepts of typography? Typography as a concept is the study of type, okay, or the written language. Almost every civilization that I'm aware of has some form of written language. And when you take a written language, the smallest unit you can break that uh, that language down into is what we refer to as a glyph or a character. Okay. So I'm just going to work with English because that's the only language that I know. Um, let's say I want to represent the concept of something, like two of something. I'm a seller. This is like 1,000 years ago, and I'm trying to sell something. Like, I don't know. I know this wouldn't happen 1,000 years ago, but I have two batteries that I want to sell or trade, or I have two pencils, or I have I don't know what else I have two on my desk of as I frantically look around, but like, two, thumb drives, right? Now, how do I represent that concept of two? I could maybe, I don't know, draw lines like that, or maybe literally even draw the object. So like, I don't know if it was a battery, maybe I'll try to draw physically two batteries to be like, I have two batteries to sell or trade or whatever it is that I'm doing. Excuse me. Or as a society, we can basically get an agreement that this character, this drawing, represents the concept of two. So it doesn't matter if it's two batteries or two apples or two chickens or two cows or whatever. We've all kind of agreed as this, at least in English speaking society, that this character is a representation of the idea of two of something. Okay. And every character is really that. Most characters are really representation of sound. So, the character A, like drawn like this in English, or as a lowercase drawn like that, that is the ah sound, the b sound, the k sound, the d, f, whatever, so on and so on and so on. And so every language, different languages have different sounds that maybe they try to represent. I used to live in Thailand temporarily, and they have a d. I can't even do it properly, but there's a DT sound that does not exist in English. It's the duh sound. And so that's a character or a sound that they're trying to mimic that it does not necessarily in all languages. So different languages try to represent different things using characters. Okay. Um, I'm once again, I'm going to take English as as the main focus here, just because that's the language I speak, and most of you, that's the language we're learning in. But in English, let's if you wanted to represent something more complicated, so for instance, in English, if I want to represent the concept of middle, meaning like the middle of something, the middle of the page or the middle of the sandwich or whatever, there's no single character I can use, right? There's no, M is a character, but that's not enough. You'd have to combine it with like combining these different glyphs or characters together, Middle together to form a word. Okay. And a word at least in English is more complex than it is in than a character. However, in some languages, you can actually represent that whole idea in one single character. So for instance, in Japanese and Chinese, which are based off of a different form of character set called kanji, you can actually represent the concept of middle with one single character, which is this, give or take. It's actually should be, I think it's a little higher. I must admit my kanji is a little rusty, but like, that is considered one single character in that you cannot break it down any further. It's not a word in that it's made up of multiple characters. It's just considered one single character within languages that use it. Okay. So let's just stick with Latin. Latin is the basis of, English, French, Spanish, German and things like that. When we talk about type, there's something called a typeface. Okay. And what is a typeface? Well, let's go back to the concept of the number two. Okay. If I was drawing the number two, I could draw it in many ways. I could draw the number two like this. I could draw the number two like this. I could draw the number two like this. Now, technically, these are all the number two, right? We all recognize it as the number two, but they look different, right? Some have, I might have thicker or thinner lines. Lines might be linear or curved. Maybe it's super stylized and I have like a bunch of like, curly cues and all that good stuff. Um, that concept of drawing, the way that a character is drawn, meaning it's like visual style of like thickness of line, complexity, all that good stuff. That is what we would refer to as a typeface. Okay. So when we talk about, if you when you write papers, I'm sure you use like Times New Roman or Helvetica or something like that. When we talk about the concept of Times New Roman, what we're really saying is this is what A through Z looks like in Times New Roman. If we say Helvetica, this is what the characters A through Z look like. If I'm talking about, I don't know, Tahoma or Lotto or whatever, it's like this is what A through Z looks like in this particular set. Okay. So how do we get these different how do we make a typeface? Now, traditionally, when we made typefaces were, depending on the culture you're from, they may have been written with India horsehair brushes. This is common in East Asia, like in Japan and China and such. Maybe they were carved into wood, or maybe they were chiseled into stone. Maybe there was a printing press that created these typefaces, right? So the concept of a font is the ability to create a typeface. In other words, what I mean by that is I can actually make Helvetica so if I wanted to, this is like a Helvetica H, give or take. And in this, so Helvetica is a concept, the ability for me to draw a character from Helvetica, that is the font. So in this case, my font is the drawing tools from Zoom here that I got. But, there might be different ways of creating Helvetica. Maybe I carve it out of, lead or something, or I chisel it into stone. Now, for a computer, which is what we're using, the way that you can create what we have is something called we have what's called a font. Okay. And a font is a file that stores all of the information for that typeface. So I'm on a computer right now. I'm on a Mac computer. In order for my Mac computer to make Baskerville the typeface, it needs to have Baskerville the font file. I don't want to get too deep into it, but the Baskerville font file actually stores all the information for the Baskerville font. It basically tells it how to make all of the characters. This is how you make a capital A. This is how you make a capital B. This is how you make a capital C, so on and so on. Okay. So how do we, get those fonts? Well, typically, you might get, you might be given a font file like this. Okay. So in this project, or in this lab, I will give you fonts. Now, how you install the fonts really depends on whether you are using a Mac, it depends on the computer itself, whether it's a Windows-based operating system or OS X or a Mac-based operating system or whether you're using something like Android or iOS, if it's a handheld like a smartphone or a tablet or something along those lines. For this, I'm assuming you're both anyone watching this, I'm assuming you're using a desktop computer, which means you're most likely either using OS X or Windows at the time of this recording. Okay. I'm going to show both how you can install a font file. So the way this would work. These are some fonts that I gave you, okay? This is going to be the Mac version, the OS X version. If you're not using OS X, you're using Windows, there'll be a supplement video where I talk about this. On a Mac, there are two ways, or two easy ways. I mean, there are multiple ways, but there's two easy ways to install a font file. One is if you're on a Mac computer, you should go to the desktop, go to the Go menu, hold down the Option key. You'll notice that when I did that, it opened up this special area called Library. Library are files that are for the computer, the operating system. Inside of that, there should be a folder called Fonts. And then what you could do is take said font, drag it in. Guess I already have it here, but let's pretend I didn't. And then now, because it's been put into here, it should have been installed. Okay. How can you tell that a font has been installed? Well, once a font's been installed on your computer, any application that lets you choose fonts, it should give you that option. So now that I've installed Frederick the Great into here, I can go to text edit. I'm just going to set up a little test file here. So I'm just using text edit. You can use Microsoft Word or any program that deals with text. And under font, show fonts, I'm going to go to Frederick the Great. It should be alphabetical, which is this. I guess it wasn't Frederick, it was Frederica the Great. And then there you go. There is my font being applied there. Let me show you another way to do this. Another way without, I call this the hard coding method, which is like you literally just going into the files of the computer. Another way to deal with this is to use something called a font manager. The font manager's job is to manage the fonts, which means it's an application that installs and uninstalls fonts. If you have a Mac computer, all Mac computers have something called FontBook. And what FontBook should allow you to do is install fonts. So what I'm going to do is go to Go, Applications, and I'm going to go to FontBook. This is an application that allows you to install fonts. So here I have two other fonts. Oops. So if you go to the the files that I gave you, actually, sorry, it's under fonts. I want to install Monotone and Palette Mosaic. Just to be honest, they're probably already. I had them left over from my past. All right, I'm going to install them into my computer. The way I'm going to do that is by going to File, Add Fonts to Current User. This is in the font book application. Find the files, which for you guys is in the folder called Fonts. And then I could go to Monotone or Palette Mosaic. Let's install that. All right, there's Monotone. I'm going to just view this. Here's Monotone, and you can see this is how the font looks. It's showing every character that you can create. The other one was Palette Mosaic, which has kind of this like cutout instruction paper kind of look. Once again, let's try this out. So I'm going to go here and format, font, show fonts. And let's find one. Palette Mosaic. Okay, there you go. That's Palette Mosaic. So you can see how we can install and work with fonts. Okay. Now, what if you wanted to work, by default, your computer has X number of fonts. Let's say you wanted to get a new font to work with. Um, you might want to find a font foundry. A font foundry is a website or a company that produces, makes fonts. Okay, I've made my own fonts before. I may even include it in here for you. It's called Inkscape Title. And it's usually a place where you can find fonts. Sometimes you may have to purchase them. Sometimes they may be free with certain, limitations, that kind of thing. What we're going to do is we're going to use the website Google Fonts. Google Fonts has a lot of fonts that we can use for free. And so these are the different fonts. Currently, there's about 1,900 fonts, which is a lot. Comes in different character sets. So some of them are Latin based, like, English, French, Spanish. Some of them are based off of other languages, character sets like kanji, so like Japanese, Chinese, Korean, that kind of stuff. Middle Eastern languages like Farsi, Hebrew would have their own set. That's, so on and so on. So I'm actually going to set this, let's set this to Latin. There we go. All right. Then you can kind of go by different styles. So like, I don't know. Let's just say for the sake of argument, I wanted to use Sand Creek. I'm going to click on that. What I'm going to do is click where it says Get Font, and I'm going to go under, this is left over from a different class. I'm going to go to where it says Download. And what that should do is give you the font file. This is the font file. It's most likely going to come through as one of two formats, a TTF or an OTF. TTF stands for True Type Format. The other one's called an Open Type Format. Either one is fine for now. It may also give you files about how you're allowed to use the file. So this goes back to like we talked about copyright and Creative Commons. This would tell you how you're legally allowed to use the typeface in what examples. In this case, as long as it's non-commercial, you can use it. I think you may be able to use it for commercial. You might want to double check. But what I'm going to do here is let's install that font into FontBook that I just downloaded. I'm going to do that by going under File, Add Font to Current User. Let's find that file that I just downloaded, which should be in my downloads folder. Sand Creek Regular. And then let's go back. I'm just going to set it as a list. Alphabetical. There you go, Sand Creek. Okay. And this is what the different character sets look like. Okay. You can test this out by going back. test. And let us set that to Sand Creek. Okay. All right, I want you guys to try that out. Try and if you're on a Mac, try installing the fonts. If you're using Windows, please go to the next video and I will explain how to install it with Windows. It's not dramatically different, it's just a little bit different, but it's a little, it is not exactly the same, so we have to go over that. But the concept of like taking the font, installing it, so that you can use it on the computer remains the same. Okay. So the next part will be other typographical concepts and how those typographical concepts can apply towards After Effects. Okay.